know from sad experience that what we might term the simple life is the best for the body. It is proper for it to receive nutrition. It is proper for it to receive exercise. It is proper for it to practice a proper hygiene. But in all things, we treat the body as a faithful friend. And if we spoil a friendship, we are in trouble. In the course of time, appetites arising in the emotional nature of the individual have come to practically control the attitude of the mind toward the body. On the one hand, there is a complete ignorance. The body simply is there, it's ours, and when we can do with it as we please, and it must either cooperate or we consider the body to be at fault. Actually, it is impossible for a body governed by natural law to work in harmony with a mind or emotion that is violating natural law. So the conflict between the natural needs of the body and the artificial activities of the individual, this conflict is bound to result in bad health. Now, the body being inferior to the being inhabiting it can be, and often is, seriously endangered by our way of life. The body needs a proper environment. And in our present intense scientific industrialism, the body of the individual is sacrificed to external factors that are themselves not necessarily valid. The body is expected to perform all kinds of labors. It is brought under the control of an economic theory in which people employ the body rather than the person in it. And if the body fails, the abilities of the person are rejected. If we live in a world in which most of human activity is devoted to a single purpose, and that is economic maintenance, the body is going to be one of the primary victims. It is not intended to be so treated. It is not intended to work deep under the earth, hour after hour, year after year. It is not intended to be locked into an industrial situation in which there is no incentive for the development of the person in the body. This person becomes merely a servant of a world economic institution. And as a result of that, in turn, the body suffers and gradually falls into a variety of infirmities. So the prudent life is one in which there is a reasonable distribution of efforts, where the body is cared for by proper recreation, relaxation, and rest and nutrition. And the person in the body is enabled to have a form, a material structure that gives opportunity for the expression of its over-self, or the divine in man. Materialism is very largely involved in this complex, inasmuch as materialism estimates the value of a complete human being in terms of his economic productivity. He is here not to be a person, but to maintain an ever-expanding system of world industry. This industry takes the person away from the natural habits of life, deprives him in many instances of the proper emotional integration in his home, in his business, everywhere that he functions. He is gradually being locked into a kind of life that is now governed largely by computerization. All this means sickness. It means trouble. It means the fact that the individual has not recognized the true nature of his own construction. This body is his house. It is his duty to keep this house as best he can, to protect it, and to gradually realize that it is not his own house alone. It is the house of his God. It is the house of the divine power which manifests through him. To keep this house is therefore not merely a physical responsibility, it is a spiritual responsibility. because if it is allowed to fall into disorder, that part of man which is the important part, the governing part, the part which is tied to the universe and tied to the divine plan of things, is forbidden natural expression. The body captured into one of these unfortunate patterns nearly always gives us warnings of approaching evil. It tells us by our own reactions that something is amiss. We discover it when we find our disposition falls apart. We find it when we observe that jealousies and all kinds of competitive attitudes make life very difficult. Another phase of the body is that it is by nature equipped to combat nearly all of the diseases which commonly affect the flesh. The body has its own protective mechanism, but if this mechanism is disarranged or the various processes of the body are corrupted, it is no longer able to meet the need and challenge of external situations. We've realized, for example, that the body can protect us from most diseases that come from parasites, bacteria, germs, and things of this nature. It is constantly throwing off from itself what has been called an invisible atmosphere. This is a sort of aura, and it is a defense against the intrusion of physical destructive factors. This defense will very often enable the individual to protect his health, to guard his life, and to avoid the contagions and infections which are all too prevalent. But in order to do this, we must recognize an analogy. Most persons who are not well organized psychologically are more open to sickness than those who are better integrated. The reason being obvious, that the well-integrated person inhabiting the body is a benefactor, helps the body to maintain its own proper functions. When the inner life becomes disturbed, it reacts upon the body, lowering resistance to the dangers of internal corruption and also from environmental contagions and infections. The magnetic field of the body does give us a kind of invisible perspiration. It is an invisible kind of fur which covers the body. And the hair on the body is more or less merely a crystallization around this type of energy, which corresponds in nature around us with the vegetable kingdom. By keeping the magnetic field fairly well adjusted, the individual, therefore, will protect himself against the diseases arising in his own mind and the ailments that come to him from the outside. We have various means of combating various ailments, but we have also developed a very pernicious situation which will have to be faced ultimately by every thoughtful person, and that is the failure of the theory in medicine of protecting health. We are working more to find ways to remedy our own mistakes, but we are not being much instructed on how to prevent these mistakes. We may get a nutritionist who will help us to balance the body, but this same balance of the body may not touch into the inner causes of deterioration, because an unhealthy mind, even in a healthy body, will ultimately destroy health. We are also trying to remove the symptoms of our own indiscretions. We are developing an elaborate pharmacology which is dedicated largely to obscuring mistakes. We are trying to neglect or kill out the body's natural means of bringing problems to the attention of the mind. We are, therefore, of the opinion in general that if we can abolish the symptom, that we have cured the ailment. This is not true and never can be. And many of the medications that we use are actually destructive of the body and its own natural resources. So we have covered a mistake, a basic mistake, by finding artificial remedies to obscure the truth. And we feel that if we have obscured the truth, all is well. We are now in the midst of a more or less obvious medical revolution in which the study of these dangerous drugs is coming into the foreground. We are trying to use drugs as a substitute for right conduct, and there's just no way in which this can be accomplished. If we allow the retiring and developing resources of the body to work as they should, we will not find it necessary, except in a great emergency, to come to its assistance, if we are able to do things well. One of the basic theories of osteopathy was that nearly all physical ailments are due to obstruction. Some process of the body has been prevented from expressing itself in a normal way. As a result of that, the body forces or rushes to the aid of the situation many resources of its own. But these resources, if they are abused, and if the condition does not come to the conscious attention of the owner of the body, will very often result in a congestion in which function is disarranged. Until this congestion is broken up, the normal processes of the body cannot be restored. Now, as we go a little further into the subject, we realize that the Kabbalists of old and other mystic groups have recognized that the body is the microcosm of the universe. The body is a miniature of all things. And strange as it may seem, the bodies of very primitive creatures, from trilobites on up and down, these bodies are all actually miniatures of a universal pattern. They are all the small archetypal architectural forms by which the complete geometry of space is epitomized into one small area. And always these natural forms take universal mathematical geometrical structure. We know this in science. We know that mathematics and geometry are the great keys to universal order, and they are nowhere more evident than in the physical body. Among those who worked very hard in the early days to understand this were, remarkably enough, not scientists but artists. Artists were the first to really contemplate the body. To them, the human form was one of the most beautiful structures that nature has produced. And in studying this structure, the artist, in an effort to transfer it to canvas or to paper or to carve it in stone or marble, had to become keenly aware of the substructure of the body. He realized that he could not simply copy the surface. When he did, the work was superficial and inadequate. So we are indebted to people like Albrecht Dürer, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, for the careful study of body structure. Out of this study came patterns like the dynamic symmetry. We found gradually the whole system of Pythagorean mathematics caught and captured and held in the bodily structure. We began to recognize that the measurements of the body were highly significant. And among the early medieval Kabbalists, there was a system of analysis of character by carefully measuring the relationships between structure in the body. It was also observed that stress and all these factors, strain, all were involved in body protective mechanisms. We learned architectural principles.